Hi, I'm Emily, and this is the story of one of the most unforgettable trips of my life. A journey I took with my boyfriend Mark through the breathtaking coffee landscapes of Colombia. We've always shared a love for coffee, not just for its taste, but for the comfort and connection it brings. One day, over our usual morning cup, we realized we knew almost nothing about how coffee is actually made. So we packed our bags and flew to Colombia, not just for a vacation, but for an adventure through the heart of the world's most famous coffee region. What we discovered was more beautiful, rich, and inspiring than we ever imagined. The moment we stepped off the plane in Armenia, a small city nestled in Colombia's coffee-growing region, I felt like we had arrived in another world. The air was thick with the scent of earth and vegetation, warm and rich, and the horizon was painted with endless waves of green hills bathed in golden sunlight. It was nothing like the city life we were used to. Here, everything moved slower, breathed deeper, and felt more alive. Our journey began with a drive through the lush countryside, past valleys carpeted with banana trees, bamboo, and coffee plants stretching as far as the eye could see. The hills were steep and dramatic, yet every inch of land seemed to be used with purpose and care. Small houses with red roofs dotted the mountainsides, and farmers waved to us from the roadside as we passed. It felt like the beginning of a story, one we were about to live in full color. When we arrived at the finca, the coffee farm that would host us for the next few days, we were welcomed with warm smiles and a fresh cup of coffee made from beans grown just meters away. It was the freshest, most aromatic cup I'd ever tasted. Fruity, smooth, and layered with flavor. Mark and I looked at each other and grinned. We knew we had come to the right place. Our room overlooked a sea of green. In the mornings, mist would rise from the valleys below, and in the evenings the hills glowed gold under the sinking sun. Roosters crowed at dawn, and we often heard the rustle of birds and monkeys in the nearby trees. Everything was alive and vibrant. This was more than a vacation. It was a window into a different way of life, slower, more grounded, and deeply connected to the land. From the very first morning at the finca, we were invited to experience life on the coffee farm, not as tourists, but as curious learners. Our hosts welcomed us with open arms, eager to share their knowledge, their routines, and their deep connection to the land. What struck me most was how every step of the process, every bean, every movement, was treated with such care and pride. Coffee here wasn't just a crop. It was tradition, family, and identity. We started by walking through the rows of coffee trees. The leaves were a deep, glossy green, and the ripe cherries, plump, red, and vibrant, stood out like jewels against the foliage. I had never seen a coffee plant up close before. I had always imagined something simpler, but the reality was far more complex and beautiful. Each tree had to be tended by hand, and each cherry picked at the right time. I tried harvesting a few myself, and quickly realized how much patience and skill it required. The workers around us moved with a rhythm that could only come from years of experience. Later that day, we followed the journey of the cherries we'd picked. First, they were sorted. Any under or overripe fruit was removed, and then fed into a small machine that separated the beans from the pulp. The bright red cherries became wet, pale beans, covered in a sticky layer called mucilage. These beans were then soaked in tanks of water to ferment and remove that layer naturally. The smell was earthy and tangy, and I was surprised by how much biology and timing were involved in what seemed like such a simple drink. After fermentation, the beans were washed and spread out to dry on large patios under the sun. Here, again, nothing was left to chance. Workers turned the beans throughout the day to ensure even drying, watching the sky for any sign of rain. We learned that if the beans didn't dry evenly, it could ruin the flavor. I stood on the edge of the patio, watching the rows of parchment-covered beans shimmer in the sun, feeling a new respect for every cup of coffee I'd ever sipped without a second thought. In the final step we witnessed, the dried beans, still protected by a thin, papery husk, were hulled, sorted again, and prepared for roasting. It was only then, after all that care and labor, that the familiar brown coffee beans we knew began to emerge. I had never imagined how much happened before the roasting even began. Every flavor note, every aromatic quality, was shaped long before heat ever touched the bean. By the end of the day, my hands were dirty and my legs sore, but my heart was full. I had always loved coffee, but now I understood it. It was no longer just a drink to wake me up in the morning. It was a product of hard work, deep tradition, and nature's quiet generosity. Mark and I sat on the porch that night, sipping another cup brewed with the very beans we had helped process, and I felt a deep gratitude for the experience. The morning of our roasting session arrived with the scent of fresh dew and anticipation. Mark and I made our way to the small on-site roastery, a modest, rustic building nestled beside the drying patios. Inside, it felt like stepping into the heart of the coffee's transformation. Bags of dried green beans were stacked in the corner, and the roaster, a gleaming machine with brass knobs and a drum that hissed gently, stood ready for action. The roaster explained that the green beans are like a blank canvas, dense, grassy, and unassuming. It's the roasting that unlocks their character. With precision and care, he began the process, pouring the beans into the rotating drum. As the temperature rose, the beans changed color, from pale green to yellow, then to golden brown. I watched, mesmerized, as steam rose, and the beans began to crackle in a sound known as the first crack. This was the moment they began to release their inner oils and aromas. We learned that slight changes in temperature or timing could alter the flavor profile dramatically. Lighter roasts preserve the acidity and delicate notes, while darker roasts bring out bold, smoky richness. The roaster let us smell the beans at different stages, grassy at first, then nutty, then something far more complex. It was a symphony of scent. Once the roast was complete, the beans were cooled and set aside. I held a few in my hands, still warm, dark brown, and slightly oily. It felt surreal knowing that just days earlier, these had been red cherries clinging to a branch. Now they were ready to become the brew we knew so well. The tasting, or cupping as it's known in the coffee world, followed. Mark and I sat at a long wooden table with small ceramic bowls in front of us. Freshly ground coffee was placed into each, and hot water was poured over the grounds, creating a fragrant crust on the surface. The aroma was deep and intense, with hints of chocolate, citrus, and something floral I couldn't quite name. We were taught how to break the crust with a spoon and inhale the steam, taking in the aroma before sipping. Each coffee had a distinct flavor. Some were bright and acidic, others smooth and chocolatey. I was amazed by how many notes you could detect when you paid attention. Hints of fruit, earth, spice, even a touch of caramel. It wasn't just about taste. It was about appreciation, understanding what made each cup unique, where the beans came from, how the altitude, soil, and roast all played a part. The experience changed the way I viewed coffee forever. I used to think of it as a routine, a habit. Now I saw it as art. Mark and I exchanged glances, grinning like kids discovering something new. We had drunk hundreds of cups of coffee in our lives, but this was the first time we truly felt it. The journey from bean to brew wasn't just a process, it was a story, and we were now part of it. That evening, we bought a few bags of our favorite roast to take home. Not as souvenirs, but as reminders. Each time we brew a cup, we'd remember the sounds of the cracking beans, the scent of the roasting drum, and the warm hospitality of the people who welcomed us into their world. Over the next few days, Mark and I immersed ourselves in Colombia's famed coffee route, winding through picturesque towns like Salento and Filandia. Each stop revealed a new dimension of the coffee world, one that extended far beyond what ends up in a cup. In Salento, after wandering through the colorful streets lined with colonial facades and flower-filled balconies, we hiked up to a breathtaking viewpoint that overlooked the Cocora Valley. There, towering wax palms, the tallest palm trees in the world, pierced the sky like elegant sentinels watching over the valley. The air was crisp, the landscape surreal, and the moment unforgettable. It felt like stepping into a living painting. Filandia, though quieter, had a charm of its own. We visited workshops where local artisans crafted delicate jewelry, baskets, and home decor using coffee plant fibers. Their hands moved with practiced grace, weaving not just objects but stories of heritage, resilience, and pride. Many of them had grown up around coffee and spoke of it not just as a product, but as a companion throughout their lives. What amazed me most was realizing that coffee wasn't just Colombia's economic backbone. It was its soul. It shaped identities, preserved traditions, and strengthened bonds between generations. Every bean harvested, every brew poured told a story, not only of hard work and dedication, but of community and connection. And for visitors like us, it opened doors to understanding a culture deeply rooted in warmth, generosity, and shared purpose. Our last stop took us to a modern processing and export center on the outskirts of Armenia, where coffee beans, now fully dried and hulled, were prepared for their journey across the globe. The contrast with the lush farms and quaint towns we had visited earlier was striking. Here, everything was efficient, technical, and fast-paced. But even amid the machines and logistics, the essence of the journey remained. We watched as the beans were meticulously sorted by size, color, and quality. Some were destined for specialty cafes in Europe, others for chain retailers in the United States, or boutique roasters in Japan. Each sack was labeled not just with numbers and codes, but with the names of farms and families, the very people we had met days earlier. Standing there, it hit me. The cup of coffee I drink at home every morning isn't just a routine. It's the final chapter in a story that began on sun-drenched hillsides, passed through the hands of passionate pickers, and was shaped by generations of knowledge and care. This global connection between growers and consumers felt more real and intimate than I had ever imagined. Mark and I took a moment to reflect on everything we had seen and learned. We had arrived in Colombia as curious tourists, but we were leaving as witnesses to a powerful narrative, a story of patience, craftsmanship, and cultural identity. The next time I sipped a cup of coffee, I knew I'd picture not just the taste, but the faces, the landscapes, and the spirit behind it. This wasn't just a trip. It was a transformation. I left Colombia with more than just souvenirs or photos. I carried with me a new appreciation for the small things that shape our everyday lives. Now, every time I sip my morning coffee, I think of the red cherries swaying in the Colombian sun, of the people who harvested them with care, and of the hills that echo with stories. If you enjoyed this journey through Colombia's coffee country, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Every week, we explore new places, cultures, and stories, while helping you learn English in a fun and immersive way. Hit the like button, share this video, and join our growing community of curious minds and coffee lovers.